Value Impulses with Dr. Ulrich Vogel. Personnel Diagnostics Insights, Leadership, Assessments, and Personnel Development.
A warm welcome again, dear listeners. We're in the Leadership in Hospitals series, and today we're on episode 4. We've already covered a few interesting topics, including the core values in leadership, the playbook, and how to fill positions properly. The roles, and last time, yes, also a bit hard to grasp. Feelings, relationships in leadership. And today, once again, I warmly welcome Steffen Köhler, Head of Human Resources and Education at Kliniken Südostbayern. Dear Steffen, it's great to have you here.
Hi, Uli. I'm happy to be here again. You could get used to this. It's fun, and yeah. Let's get started. I think the viewers are already really eager for the content by now.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we can't waste any time. And today, it's really a lot of fun. In our pre-chat, we really got right into it, so I said, stop, Steffen. We need that for the episode now. Otherwise, we'll have to do it all over again. So, what's today's topic? How can a leader, and always in relation to hospitals, implement modern leadership systems like team boards, feedback systems, and especially, and that's where we're putting a bit of focus today, OKRs, so objectives and key results, in practice, in order to increase efficiency but at the same time promote the well-being of the team. And ultimately, also the purpose of the organization, which is, in the end, to promote patient health and patient satisfaction. We're looking at modern leadership systems to circle back a bit to Hartmann. Today, we're focusing a bit on the systemic value dimension. In the last episode, we were focused on the human aspect. All of that is valid. And it's not like you can just say, no, everything has to be about people and systems don't exist. Of course we need them, but again, systems are there for people, not people for the systems. But today, we want to focus on intelligent and effective systems. We already talked a bit about team boards in the first episode. Steffen, I don't think we need to do anything there. We don't really need to do much more with that today, but I'd like to share an anecdote from a certain field. A client of mine, whom I worked with for years, was in the pharmaceutical sector, in production. And the goal there was to really achieve a huge transformation. I'm talking about moving away from very traditional manufacturing. And there was a top management consultancy involved, moving towards truly dynamic manufacturing, where everything fits together seamlessly. And I still remember what was going on during the transformation. They actually had transformation boards as well. Not only did they develop them, but they also trained agents in that direction and really educated the staff. At that time, I also had the opportunity to observe all of this as a leadership development specialist, and I actually saw the various boards myself. That was something new for the company back then, and it was also digitized and really well received. It ranged from smiley stories to key figures, but also included the softer factors. Of course, you can take it too far. After a certain amount of time, maybe it became a bit much again. Too much, but it became clear that with these kinds of things, you can really achieve a lot within the system. But let's take a look at something else today. Let's look at OKRs, at objectives and key results. This is a methodology that's been around for quite a few years now, and it comes from the US. If I remember correctly, Apple was really big on this, as well as other tech companies. Where you go and say, let's also take a broader view. Besides what we already have to achieve operationally, let's also look at what we fundamentally need to achieve strategically. We pick something out and say, that's key. That's something where we say, that's where we want to go, and we need to mobilize everything for it. And people are kind of wired that way, in the sense that they can get fired up about it. And so it really developed into I'd say, a complementary management method, in addition to what already existed. I mean, those who have been in the business for a while know about MBO, management by objectives, and so on. In my opinion, that's old news, but OKR is something, objective and key results, that's relevant and definitely modern. And now I'll just pass the ball over to you, Steffen, so we can dig into this OKR topic a bit today, and you can also share your thoughts, because, especially in hospitals, things are so interconnected, and it's incredibly important that everything works together. And I think it can really play a connecting, fantastic role. So go ahead and get us started, Steffen, so we can really do a bit of a deep dive here.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd be more than happy to do that. That's why I found the topic so appealing right away. When you look at it, a hospital is basically the classic expert organization. We've talked about that before. And people often talk about these silos, where everyone is in their own world, working away on their own. And then there's a big handover of the topic, of the value creation process, which of course ends up stalling in with assignments. Yeah, something didn't fit there and something's not quite right over there. This person and that person, and assignments. And that's something you really have to think about, because in the end, as our attentive listeners have probably noticed by now, we always want to focus on the patient. That's what's at the center. And everything else should really take a back seat. And that's exactly why I'm such a big fan of it, because you have to consider, how do I actually manage to do that? Multiple institutions, multiple areas, multiple departments coming together. And one thing is pretty obvious. On a ward, if you put yourself in the patient's shoes, lying there in your bed. And then, suddenly, the ward round comes in. And then the doctor rushes in with a whole bunch of other doctors, all peering intently at something or other. In the past, they used to look through their big files, all that paper. Nowadays, not so much.
They'd flip them open.
These days, thankfully, they usually check either on tablets or on the ward computers. And then, in the end, you really didn't understand anything and had to ask the nurse again, what exactly did the senior consultant or chief physician just say? So, I didn't really understand anything, but later my wife will come and ask what's wrong with me. And at some point, we realized that you have to work on these kinds of processes, and that's exactly what we did successfully, with something like bedside patient handovers, where basically everyone involved is present. The doctor makes an effort to speak in a way that, for one, the nursing staff knows what their tasks are. And of course, the nursing staff also brings their own issues back to the doctor. That's really great nowadays. The nursing staff is truly independent now. That means they have their own roles and responsibilities, and they handle them with confidence. And together, this creates something positive for the patient. And we include the patient right away as well, because both of us explain things to them. We both explain the diagnosis and the nursing care, and to some extent the therapy, at least what will be done with the patient. And of course, the doctor formally proposes these things. And when all of this works well, now, let's take a look behind the scenes, and the doctor doesn't arrive late to this ward round, but is there when it's scheduled, and the nursing staff is well prepared. And the patient is also there, not off somewhere else. If they're not in transit between X-ray and their bed, then a flow develops. And that flow can only happen, a comfortable flow, and of course an economic flow that ultimately avoids waste, when the processes are well coordinated. And you can achieve that if you dangle the carrot a little bit. If you say, hey folks, this makes a difference. And in our case, that means seamless processes and a higher throughput of patients. And hopefully, the occasional bit of praise as well. From the responsible ward manager or the doctor in charge in that area, so that the staff know, hey, we did a good job. I think that's great. I mean, we know that in the American systems, where this comes from, it was of course also very much about compensation and so on. That's not our approach, nor is it our goal, but we do want to take the positive elements from it. Or, I'd also like to explain an example from my own area a bit further. It was about the topic of the onboarding process. There are a lot of players involved, everyone. Anyone who's dealt with HR knows, the new employee is coming, the start date is getting closer. Oh my goodness, does the department even know that they're starting on Monday? Today is already the 28th, and the 1st is just around the corner. It's coming up fast. Oh, and we also wanted to give them some sort of orientation day, and there were supposed to be some giveaways on their desk too. Oh dear, is the IT even working? Oh, I actually forgot to submit the request so they have a computer and access. They also need a key, so I have to rush to the key management office. Oh crap, that guy's on vacation now. That's so annoying. How can he be on vacation right now? Yeah, maybe I could have just let him know in time. And we took a look at the whole process, really across the board. It was actually really helpful, having everyone at the table and agreeing with everyone on what kind of lead times you actually need. When can you guarantee that everything will be where it needs to be on day X? And we put all of that in writing, including a great documentation sheet that gets sent out early to the manager who's supposed to welcome the new employee. That worked really well, and it was just as much a cross-functional effort. Across existing, and maybe also very noticeable, often individual departments or silos, as I called them earlier. And we broke down barriers there, and that's been really well received. We also make sure to get feedback on this. New employees regularly get the chance to give us feedback on the onboarding process. By the way, with the patients, in the first example, it's the same. We also collect patient feedback, and we analyze it and see that these processes are really well received, especially when the patient simply feels, wow, they really care about me. And we've seen that, on the contrary, it's actually a very positive thing for them. That people are talking about them and not somewhere else. At first, there was this question, well, is it really okay if we talk in front of the patient? But it's totally fine. And they actually perceive it as respectful, and it brings us a lot of efficiency. And yes, I think the teams are recognized as such. And that's exactly how it should be. At least, that's how I understand collaboration. And then, I think, the reward or the result is simply a good atmosphere. And that's worth it for everyone. It doesn't always have to be about money.
Absolutely. I think, sure, if you look at it from an Anglo-Saxon perspective, it's often tied to money. But I don't think that's really so important. The last thing you mentioned, the transparency of talking in front of the patient, that's almost like in a restaurant where you can see right into the kitchen. That means you're being open about it, and I think that's absolutely the right way to go, and I feel comfortable with that too. But I actually think your two examples are really good. It's good to talk about OKRs. On the one hand, keeping the patient in focus, and on the other, the new employee. And when I'm just starting out with the process, it's also a matter of first impressions, so to speak. You never can change, you never change, get a second chance for the first impression, as they say in English, so you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And it's always a bit of a litmus test. I was recruited, and of course, everything was painted as wonderful, everything's great, and so on, but if I show up on the first day and it's not how I'd hoped or imagined, then I have to start working against that. And in a larger organization, as you said, it's really nice because so many things have to work together for it all to function. And if we set the OKR here at this point, listen up, folks, this first impression. That we manage to make sure that new people who join us, who come on board, just have a fantastic feeling. I've actually described this myself, as we mentioned earlier, in my last book, how it was with my first employer in the private sector. I came home in the evening and said to my wife, wow, I think I've really, truly landed in the right place. And for that, you also have to see, there's always practice involved. You say, break down silos, and that's right, but I'd go even further. To achieve something like that, you need integrators, so I don't need a ton of coordinators. And I need people who are active in these areas and who then go in and say, come on, let's do these things together, not to create a new coordination office, but to actually get involved. To actually talk to the people involved, so in that sense, it's a classic case where you can say, hey, we can really make a huge difference, and I'll hand it back over to you in a second. Steffen, make sure that the department actually works together better. But I'll hand it back over to you again.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good point to maybe dig a little deeper and discuss it further. Uli, I have another question for you as well. What can be done to be even more efficient? In a structure like ours, isn't it incredibly easy to get caught up in the daily business, in day-to-day management? And this whole, for heaven's sake, the new colleague is already coming tomorrow. And ideally, I'd want them to start right away. Right at the bedside, or in the or with payroll, or in accounting. How do good systems manage this? That you actually take the resources and say, okay, come on, I'll grit my teeth and say, no, I can handle this, so that this first impression works really well. Do you have any special experiences with that?
Well, I do refer to Yves Moyer in this context. We recently had a workshop together where you were there and made a great contribution. In his TED Talk, he really shows this beautifully with collaboration and teamwork. Using the example of the women's 4x100-meter relay final at the World Championships, where you can really see what this kind of cooperation is all about. And he's also done a few other TED Talks on the topic and written books about it as well. But what it's really about is this: in a relay race, you don't need an extra athlete to come in and figure out how to pass the baton. That's something they're supposed to do themselves. And that's exactly the point in relation to your question. I have to look for people in day-to-day operations, approach them, ask them, and also say, listen, can you take this person under your wing? Or could you always be the one to do it? Since you're really good at it, when someone makes first contact, you take them by the hand. I still remember my own first contact at that company. Someone came over from the Dusseldorf office, and he said, hey Uli, you're the new guy here. Come on in right away for an assessment. I'll show you how it works, and you can help me out right away as well. So, being thrown right in often gives you an immediate sense of importance. And not just a sense of acceptance, but also of being included, which is one of our basic needs.
A sense of belonging.
And that's exactly the point. And that's why, according to Mayo, it's integrators, not coordinators, who are responsible for this. That means getting people who are actually in the business involved, and that creates that feeling. Does that answer, at least a bit, what you wanted to say?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, exactly. So, is that it? And the other point was your example with the patient, where it was really about how these things fit together, how the different departments manage to do it. And at the end of the day, it's not just nurses and doctors, who of course have very clear roles, but as a patient, those lines often get blurred. Of course, and I think you just explained that really well, in a very vivid way. But last summer, I was out with my wife, and she had a really big bite somewhere on her leg. And we already thought, oh God, blood poisoning and all that. So we went there and we were treated excellently at a hospital. Not in your area, though, we were in another part of Germany. We were really admitted, passed around, and then transferred to the second hospital we went to. At the first hospital, we were basically already kind of sent on our way. So you see, you can create an atmosphere in a hospital where, right from the start, from the patient's perspective, you get the feeling, aha, the right hand knows what the left is doing. Aha, everything is interconnected. You just get passed along like that, and on top of that, not just being passed along, but you also get the feeling, and maybe we're back to the previous episode, leadership through relationships, that there's a sense of humanity involved as well. So in that sense, I really do believe that OKRs, which we've chosen as our focus today, these leadership systems, OKR, an example, objective, and key results of how we can create connections across these different areas and, at the same time, weave things together more tightly. And to be able to create an overall experience for the person involved, whether that's the patient or the employee. But on our agenda, we didn't just have OKRs, we focused on them a bit today, but we also had the team boards. However, I think we've already talked enough about those recently, and today I discussed them again with another client. Let's just quickly, in the remaining minutes, actually come back to the feedback systems. Feedback culture, and feedback systems are things I consider extremely important, and I think that's still a weak spot in many companies. There's this terrible saying, the phrase, no news is good news. And then there are a few other terrible expressions as well. So, a feedback culture, and I actually experienced this myself. When I switched from one company to another, I suddenly realized, oh, there's no feedback culture here. And then I really missed it. In the company before that, it was there. So, it's more than just a lubricant. It's something absolutely essential, a contribution to the culture. And that's why I'm asking you as well, since today we're talking about leadership systems. How does it work for you? Have you maybe tried to implement something as well? Certain feedback systems. Let's spend the last few minutes talking a bit about feedback and feedback systems in hospitals as well. What are your experiences? What thoughts come to mind for you?
Absolutely. I think there are two main topics that are really important here. Now, let me bring in a quote or a public figure. Thomas Saddleberger, a great healer, always said, "Feedback is breakfast for champions." That phrase has guided me ever since I first heard it from him. At an event where I had the chance to see him. He really is. A man with incredible know-how, tremendous energy, and strength. And he truly lived by that. And since then, that's really been my guiding principle. And wherever I go, I try to give feedback, to get feedback in all sorts of ways. That's one thing where I'm just genuinely committed to it. But the second thing is also to systematize it. If you imagine, for example, that an employee, let's say a manager, is asked where they see themselves, and they say, honestly, I'm actually doing really well, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And basically, to put it simply, I'm a fantastic manager.
Yeah.
Self-perception doesn't necessarily match how others see you. Why not? Because I just came from a leadership discussion, an exit interview, and the person who left the company saw things a bit differently. And I think it would be really valuable to have a tool like a 270 or 360-degree feedback, or at least some kind of leadership feedback, because that really unmasks things and makes them a bit clearer, but I think it reflects things in a fair way. And if, as a manager, you want to, you can take it seriously and really address the issue. And then you end up with a lot of areas to learn from. And of course, combined with, for example, depending on how we do it and at what level we are, maybe also with the insights from profiling, which ideally we did during hiring or something like that. Or when identifying development needs, that already gives you a pretty good 3D view of what's coming up and what needs to be done. And that's why it's such a wonderful systemic tool that simply helps us to classify and assess the person in front of us, and to do so in a way that fits perfectly. So to speak, tailored, like a Milanese suit tailor, who puts together the measures so that they fit, so that they help, and the person would also accept it very differently if they've received good feedback, valid, fact-based feedback, and not just because Köhler has made something up again. That's not the point at all. That's why I like such systems. And we're currently in the process of building something like that ourselves, based on the Great Place to Work and related questions. By the way, we actually had a second topic on the go for those who are interested. It's a very low threshold, IT-supported tool where employees and managers could interact using sliders and rate a lot of different aspects on a regular basis. In some areas it worked well, and of course it was voluntary. That's why it wasn't fully embraced everywhere. I think we've still got a way to go there. But where it did work, the colleagues were really good and enthusiastic, because managers actually got broad feedback for once about their work and how they're perceived by the employees. That shows me we're going to keep moving forward with this. We might just need to fine-tune the systems a bit more and make them a bit more tailored to the company. You just have to admit, nurses and doctors, they're dealing with patients all day long. They really don't have much time or resources to sit down at a computer. For us in administration, that's not really an issue. We can usually find 5 or 10 minutes to do something like that.
Do it.
The nursing staff, they're honestly just glad when they can get out after an 8-hour shift. Then they just want to relax, and a doctor after 10 or 11 hours. After their shift, once they've finished writing their letters and everything, they're happy too when they get home. And then we come along and say, now we need some feedback again, and so on. It always has to fit in. We understand that, the assignment. And that's why we always think carefully about what we do, even so. But in these areas, we also have the need for employees to feel seen from their own perspective. And that's why we also need a structured, systematized leadership tool there to support the leaders as well. Because they're asking themselves, what am I supposed to do? Yeah, listen, just go in and.
Yeah, I mean, it still has to be practical for everyday use. You're absolutely right. People there are sometimes stressed to the max from A to Z. And on the other hand, we also have the leaders, them too. You just described something in a pretty striking way. There are people who simply think they're amazing. I've had the chance to ask a lot of people, how would you rate your ability for critical self-reflection? And I've never heard anyone say, oh, I'm actually pretty bad at that. I should really work on it. So everyone thinks, in some way, that they're really good at it. But that's just not the case. And you can see that pretty clearly in profiling as well, by the way. That's why we need these systems. You brought that up nicely. That you can work with 360-degree, 270-degree feedback, whatever it may be, so that it really gets through, so people can actually perceive the different perspectives. Because a major source of conflict among people comes from different perceptions. And if we can actually exchange our perceptions, then we have a real chance to get better. Time is just flying by. Dear Steffen, I just want to summarize what we've done today. Of course, we took a look at modern leadership systems. We quickly covered team boards, and we took a closer look at OKRs, objectives and key results. And you also shared some great examples, didn't you? And at the end, we also took a look at feedback systems. I think these are, for us, essential tools for effective leadership and for continuous improvement within the team. So, it not only boosts efficiency, but above all, it strengthens team cohesion. And at the end of the day, it also improves communication and team performance. Only through collaboration and with these tools does everything run more smoothly. It just works so much better. That's why you should use them, and that's also my message to all the listeners. Now, stepping away from the hospital context for a moment. If you're in a hospital, sure, this is obviously relevant here. But if you're outside of it, take these ideas with you and think about how you can apply them in your own context. And as a quick preview for our next episode, episode 5, that one will be about strengths-based collaboration in a thriving culture. For me, that's the second of the 3 most important leadership tasks, the key responsibilities of a leader. The first one was already discussed back in episode 2. Playbook, role assignment. Now, the second one. This one's about creating the right atmosphere and culture so that people can work together based on their strengths, and so everyone has the chance to grow. I'll talk about the third important one in the upcoming episodes. I'm not going to reveal it just yet, but it's exciting and also really important. Steffen, I thought you were fantastic today, the way you handled these topics. And I think we complemented each other quite nicely. Everyone has their own area, and you explained the hospital side of things really, really well, but also brought in deep insights from your overall experience. Do you want to say a final word, or is it good as is? We could still go for a little swing from your side right now.
Yeah, I really enjoy swinging with this topic. So this is really a topic that's close to my heart, this interaction between employees and their supervisors, and creating a space where both take time for each other, where appreciation happens, and where you can grow together. And in the last episode, we talked about emotional intelligence and about active listening and so on. And here, we've kind of shifted the focus a bit. But here, it's actually a bit different. Actually, that's what. Where did that come from? How did that happen? But when you bring it all together, you can see how it matches up, how you naturally combine the techniques and methods. And then the employee who feels appreciated sees that the other person is really listening to them. But it also works the other way around. I think nowadays, a strong leader also thrives on feedback from their employees. And I think, just as a final point, I'll just throw it out there. We can discuss it another time, but fearless leadership is a huge topic. And when employees come forward, open up, and say, I don't really feel great about this. Could we maybe talk about it? I think that's fantastic, because then I realize they're brave enough to speak up. And then I head home after work feeling satisfied because I realize I'm accomplishing what's expected of me these days. I've given space for that. I'm giving them the opportunity to develop, or maybe not, as it turns out. And they're brave enough to tell me when I'm more of a hindrance than a help. And as we all know, I can only demotivate, and that's not what I want. And that's when I get really clear feedback. And with that, things have come full circle. That was basically my finale for today. The last rocket. And now you wanted to say, let's go to bed. Of course not. Hopefully, many of you are listening to this in the morning on your way to work. So, have a great workday. For us, that's it for today.
Exactly.
Just like Polchin Panda used to say. And I think I'll be back. No question about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Nothing can top that. I wish you all the best, dear listeners. Until the next episode. Bye-bye.
Take care.